Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second video in the Informational Literacy series. Today's episode is called The Types of Fake News. I'm going to talk about a few different types of fake news to help us create a little bit of a taxonomy about misinformation. But first, last week you were left with a challenge to identify which of these two people were generated by AI. The majority of the people that I talked to thought that the woman on the right was generated by artificial intelligence, and they were correct. Yes, the woman on the right is not a real person. Instead, she was created by a randomizing computer algorithm. But I have some good news for those of you that thought the guy on the left was not real either, because you were both correct. Yes, in fact, both of these images were generated by AI and are not real people. When you look really closely into their faces, it's really astounding technology, and perhaps even a little bit daunting in terms of what the future might hold for this kind of tech. There's a really great website for you to check out. It's called whichfaceisreal.com, in which you can see a few more of these challenges, but with only one right answer this time. And after you've done it for a while, you might notice something that computers are not quite as good at producing yet. And if you can figure it out, you can start to get it right every time. Check it out and see if you can figure out what the pattern is. The first form of misinformation I want to talk about is satire. Satire is a form of comedy in which the shortcomings of a person, business, or perhaps even society itself are targeted for a joke. Often it's done by giving a highly exaggerated story. One of my favorite all-time radio shows was from CBC Radio called This Is That. And the show was a collection of satirical news stories, but they were so well done that it would take you a minute to realize it wasn't a real news story if you tuned into the middle of an interview. I remember tuning in one day to a story about the mayor of Montreal introducing a bylaw that would require all dogs to be bilingual, and I totally fell for it. It wasn't until I heard the jingle at the end of the show that I realized I was duped. But really good satire like this one will often hint at a larger societal issue of how far will Quebecers' language laws go. Cultural satire is actually a bit of a Canadian thing and has been featured for years on television, like the Royal Canadian Air Farce, This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and more recently in the Beaverton. It's mostly innocent and all in good fun, but increasingly what is being labeled as satire is becoming hateful and divisive and simply targeting one person or group over and over again. Hence, it's making it onto our list here today. Another type of misinformation is false context. False context is when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. What we're looking at here is a widely shared photo on social media of a park in Australia. The caption was, "Look at the mess left behind by the climate change protesters." Problem being, this picture was of a different park, at a different location, from a different event. Interestingly enough, the climate change protesters did show up the next day in order to clean up that mess, but as you could probably predict, that didn't get as much airplay as the original photo. Staying on the climate change front, here is a photo of a glacier from 2008 with what is apparently a side-by-side of it again in 2018. It's an alarming photo, at least it would be if it were taken in the same location. But a deeper dive reveals that the pictures were actually taken 2 years apart and at opposite ends of the globe. A more recent example was with the January 8th bombing of the U.S. air bases in Iraq. This image does show actual pictures of airstrikes, but not of the January 8th bombing of U.S. air bases. So yes, Iran did fire on 2 U.S. air bases in Iraq on January 18th, but these pictures might reframe it in a more dangerous way. Another type of misinformation is imposter content. This is when genuine sources are impersonated. We use mental shortcuts to help us make sense of the world when we see a brand, logo, or specific design style, and so we can become a bit more prone to it. Quote graphics are a common source for this, and ones like this are effective because they mimic a style that has some form of credibility. I'm trying to avoid U.S. politics as much as possible here, but there's so many great examples out there in this field, such as this one of Donald Trump's mother stating that her own son would be a total disaster as a politician. This one's an impersonation of a news outlet, quoting a U.S. Congresswoman that also happens to be a Muslim, that she is asking for violence from other countries against the US based on their actions in Iran. It uses a logo similar to the actual media outlet, but careful examination can see that it was obviously forged. The next two types of fake news are perhaps the most harmful: manipulated and fabricated content. But that'll have to wait until next week. So hope you're starting to see how fake news is not a great term for what we're seeing. Most of this content actually isn't even fake. It's often real, but just used out of context. And most of it can't even be described as news. It's mostly rumors, memes, and manipulated photos. So, I'm going to leave you on a challenge again. And this week's challenge is to head over to whichfacesreal.com and see if you can figure out that pattern that I was talking about earlier. I'd like to see if anyone can guess 5 faces correctly in a row without making any mistakes. Tune in next week to find out how to do it. Cheers.